Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. I'm Hamad and today I'll present a project on which me and my group members Anique and Yahya have been working on. The project which we chose to work on is the snake game. In this presentation, we will see how the game works, what are the core functions of the game, and how we made it. First of all, we will look at the libraries used in our code. Now, as you can see, we have used a total of four libraries in our code: the input-output stream library, the C standard library, the windows.h library, and the conio library. The C standard library has been used for the random command generation. Now, this will be used for the random food generation of in our code. The windows.h library has been used for the controlling of console, so it displays our output smoothly on the console. Lastly, the conio library is used for the command like the get character command and keyboard hit command, and they will be used for the input of the movement of the snake. Now, coming to the code as seen here, we have done some global declarations. Now these are declared globally because they will be used throughout our code and we won't need to pass them as parameters to the functions again and again. Firstly, we have declared a Boolean type game over. Now this will decide either the game should run or not. Secondly, the game's borders, width and height are initiated as constants. Now these values are initiated as constants because the value of the border will be same throughout the game and it will not change at any instance. Here the x and y will store the coordinates of the snake and store the position of the snake. The food X and food Y will store the coordinates of the food where the food will be spawned. Here, int score will keep the track of the score. It will tell us what the score is when the snake eats the food. Now we can see that two arrays of tail X and tail Y are also initialized over here. Now these will basically store the position of the tail. Here these arrays are set to 250, which means the maximum position of 250th tail can be stored in them. We can set it to any number we want, but in our code we just made them of size 250. Now our tail n is also initialized here. It will keep the track of the length of the tail. It will tell us how long the tail is at any point. Now here enum, which is also known as enumeration, is also used. It is a user-defined data type through which we made a direction data type which contains left, right, stop, up, and down. Now the stop is set to 0, which means the snake will not move until a key is pressed. The left and right have two T's at the end of them. This is because the left and right are the commands in the windows.h library, and when we used left and right with single T's, it showed errors. So that's why we are using two T's instead of one. At last, we have declared a snake dir of data type direction, which will be responsible for the direction of the snake. Now I'm coming towards the function declarations. As we can see, our code consists of total five functions: the system function, draw function, logic function, input function, and int main function. The system function deals with the initial variable values and statuses, like the initially what should be the position of the snake, where should the food be spawned when the game starts initially, when what should be the score count, etc. The draw function is responsible for all the outputting of the screen output and the going on the screen. It outputs the snake, the walls, borders, food, the snake tail, etc. Now the logical function, it deals with all the logical work, like what happens when the snake dies, how the snake dies, what happens when the snake eats the food, etc. Now the input function only has a single task. It is only responsible for taking the input from the user and storing a specific value in the snake div when a specific key is pressed. Coming towards the main function, as we can see, our main function contains a while loop. Now, this while loop will run until the game over is not true. As soon as the game over is true, our code will terminate, the while loop will terminate, and code will end. As we can see, the system function is called outside the while loop. Now, this has a very good reason. As we can see in the system function, the initial values of the game are stored as the snake is in the middle, the score is 0, and food is generated randomly. Now, if we call the system function inside the while loop, what it will do is that it will again and again bring the snake to the middle. It will again and again set the score to 0, and it will again and again randomly generate the food. Now, as seen here in our while loop, we are using a set console cursor position command. Now, this is basically a command of windows.h library, and what this command does is that when the code is running and it has done its first iteration, as soon as the cursor reaches the end of the console, it will take the from the end of the console and put it back to the starting position in the console. Now this will ensure the smooth display of our output in our code. Now for the explanation of the system and draw function, I would like to pass it to Yahya Iqbal, who will further explain those two functions.
Thank you, Hamad, for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Yahya Iqbal, and I'm excited to guide you through the workings of the word system function in our Snake game. Before we dive into its code, let me explain that this function is responsible for initializing the game state. It ensures that our game starts with the right setup. Okay, so first of all, by default, the game over is set to false, which means that the initially indicating that the game is not over at the start. Snake direction, snake tail represents the direction in which the snake is moving. It is set to stop initially, indicating that the snake is not moving at the beginning. Okay. As for the snake's initial position, they're set to the center of the game area, as x is equal to width divided by 2 and y is equal to height divided by 2. So meaning the half of both the values of width and height, which are the center of our game area. Okay, score is set to 0 initially, and now for our initial food position, we'll randomly generate the food in between the game area, and we'll use width minus 1 and height minus 2 to print the food in the game area, not over the border or outside it. This completely ensures that. And we'll use the random function from CHTD library to randomly generate the food. Okay, coming over to our draw function, which is important as it draws the upper border, left and right border, the head of the snake, the tail of the snake, and also the lower border, and prints the score below it. This function is responsible for rendering the game, including the snake, food, and borders to the console. Okay, first of all, for drawing the top border, a loop is used to print the hash character for the top border. This loop runs to the width times to include left and right borders. Okay, now for the game grid, we use the nested loops. Okay, for each cell, it checks whether it is on the left or right border. If so, it prints hash to draw the border. Okay, not in between. Okay, for drawing the snake's head, tail, and food inside the inner loop, the function checks the current position. If the position matches the snake's head given by x and y, it prints 0 to represent the head. If it matches the food position given by the food x and food y, it prints the star to represent the food. And if it matches any segment of the snake's tail given by snake tail x and tail y arrays, it prints O to represent the tail segment. Okay, now for the bottom, similar to the top border, this loop prints hash character for the bottom border. And for displaying the score, we have the function print the score. Okay, notice we have used a boolean, right? Boolean print for this. And for this, why did we use it? It's because to track whether the current cell being processed in the game grid should be printed to the console or left as an empty space, right? The primary purpose of this is to avoid double printing characters, and also uh, with the increase in the snake tail, the border should not increase as well, right? So that's also the purpose of our snake bool print, which is initially set to false, and it checks if it prints the character, if checks the j and I indices, and according to the condition, it prints the character O if it is equal to that of snake's head, so snake's tail, sorry. And if the current cell is not part of snake's tail, then it remains false, the print variable. After the loop, it checks if the value of print. If print is false, it means the current cell is not part of the snake's tail, and of course, then it prints an empty space. And thank you. That's for our draw function. And for our next functions, I would like to hand it over to Anique. Thank you.
Nice cover from Yahya Iqbal. Now let's move on to the snake tail function. What is going on into this snake tail function? So first we are doing is that we are initialization variables. What this initialization do is it stores the current position of the first tail segment of the snake. Means first first tail segment after head like this. It is the head and it is the first tail segment of the head. Now, what will it do is that It will store the position. Now, it will store the position of the first tail segment into the memory. Now, what's going on here? What's the purpose of this? The purpose of this is of x and y coordinate is that this will allow the first segment of the tail to follow the head movement. To follow the head movement means where the head will move, the first segment of the tail will follow the same movement and same path. Now, the question arises that where are the remaining parts of the tail segments? So the remaining parts of the tail segment is covered up in this for loop. So this for loop's main purpose is to print the remaining part of the to control to initialize the remaining parts of the tail function, not print, it's the displays function, but to control. Now what's going on here is that this will print or this will control the remaining part of the tail segment of the snake after the first segment, after this first segment of the tail. Now, what is the purpose of these? The purpose of these is to follow the tail segment. Means first to follow the first tail segment and the second tail segment will, and third tail segment will follow the second tail segment. This allows to make to move the snake or to show that the tail segments of the snake are the body parts of the snake and they will move according to the snake's head. How they will move? First of all, the first tail segment will follow the head's movement. Now, the remaining tail segments will follow each other to show like they are a part of the snake. And the number of tails and number of tail segment will increase one by one as the snake's head touches the food or eats the food. So let's sum up the whole snake tail function. What's the purpose is that to store the current position of first tail segment. Then the loop's purpose is to print or to control the second remaining part of the tail segments of the snake. So overall, it is to control the tail of the snake from starting first segment of the tail to the last segment of the tail. Now, from here, our group leader Hamad will continue his part of the code.
Thank you, Anique, for explaining the snake tail part of the logic function. Now I will further explain the game over and food eating part of the logic function. Now it can be seen that in the first part a for loop is used and inside the for loop a if statement is used. Now what this does is that the if statement checks that the snake's coordinate match with the coordinates of the tail segment of the snake or not. Now if the coordinates of the tail segment and the coordinates of the snake head match, it sets the game over to true, it clears the screen and see out game over. Now the for loop is used to check the same condition for every segment of the tail. In the second part, we are again using a if statement. This time this if statement checks if the coordinates of the snake match with the coordinates in the boundaries or not. If the coordinates of the snake head match with the height, width, or x is equal to 0 or y is equal to minus 2, then it sets the game over to true, again clears the screen and see out game over. Now here the x is equal to 0 represents the left border of the screen, y is equal to minus 2 represents the upper border of the screen, and height and width represent the right and lower bottom of the screen. Now here y was meant to be 0, but due to some bug in our code, it was going 2 layers above the upper boundary. So we set it to minus 2, which in result fixed the problem. Okay, in the third part of the code, we have again used if statement. Now this if statement checks if the snake's head coordinate meet with the coordinate of the food. If the coordinates of the snake's head meet with the food coordinates, it will change the food's position to another random position. It will increment the score by whatever value you want. In our case, we have set it to 100, and it will also increment the size of the snake's tail. Coming towards the snake movements, for understanding how this works, first we need to understand the input function. So as we can see in the input function, we have used a if statement. Inside the if statement, we have used switch case. In the condition of the if statement, we can see we have used a command known as the keyboard hit command. Now the keyword hit command, what it does is it tells the compiler that a key has been pressed or not. Now, if a key has been pressed, then it will move towards the switch case statements inside the if statement. Now, in the condition of the switch statement, we have used another command which is known as the get character command. Now, what the get character command does is it tells the compiler what key has been pressed by the user. For example, if we press W, then in the switch case statement, it moves towards the case W. In the case W, what it does is it changes the value of snake dir to up. If we press A, it will move towards the case A and it will give the value of left to snake. If we press S, it will give the value of down to snake, and if we press D, it will give the value of right to snake. Now moving to back towards the snake movement in the logic function. Here we can see another switch case is used, but this time in the condition of switch, we have used the snake dir, which we have taken input. Now, if the snake dir is up, it will directly move towards the case up. In the case up, what it will do is it will start decrementing the value of y with each loop. So what it does is the if in the console, the y0 and x0 is in the top left corner of the screen. So as the snake was in the middle, so it had some positive y value and positive x value. So for the snake to move up, what we needed to do is we needed to decrement y because this y-axis, and if we start decrementing in y, it will move towards upward direction because here it is y0. Same is the case with case down. For the case down, it will start incrementing the value because if we will increment, the snake will move downwards. For the case left, it will start decrementing the x coordinate of the snake. So it will start moving left, and for the case right, it will start incrementing the x value, so it will start moving right. Now at last, we will just show how the code runs by just executing it. And here we can see, as we can see, our code works completely fine. As we eat the food is randomly generated to another position, and the snake tail also increases. We can also see the cursor moving back and forth because this is because of the set console cursor command, which is again bringing the cursor from the last position to the start of the console. And due to this, we have a smooth output. Now, if we touch a boundary, then our stake should die. Yes, it does, and we get outputted game over. You can see. So this was our complete code. We tried to break it into parts for easier understanding. I hope it was understandable. Thank you and Allah Hafiz.